lot of physicians or clinicians, almost 25%, are using AI in an unauthorized manner without any real controls around that.
It is so convenient to just take up your phone while you are going around rounds in the hospitals or even as a general practitioner in the clinic. To take out ChatGPT, just type in a few phrases to either diagnose the patient using text, or even you have an X-ray imagery, you just send it to ChatGPT and ask it, do you spot any anomalies?
0.001% of training data resulted in a 5% increase in wrong outputs.
If you're training your AI on bad data, it's going to give you bad output every single time.
Almost 50% of AI-generated code introduces vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting.
In the medical space, IEC 62304 dictates the way that medical software needs to be developed in a safe fashion.
Is this becoming a bigger problem than we think?
Hello, and welcome back to the Med Device Cyber Podcast. We have here your usual co-hosts, Trevor Slattery and Christian Espinosa, and then we have a very special guest coming in from Singapore as well. Today, we're going to be talking about some really exciting things with code security, as well as how AI has helped it, and then in some ways, how it's hurt it, and what we can do to make sure that we're developing safer code within the medical space. I want to start by turning it over to you, June, to do a little bit of an intro and some background on yourself, and then we can go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, very good morning to Christian and Trevor as well. Thank you for having me on the podcast. So a bit of the background myself. I was actually not from the health and medtech space. I started off in the military, spent 4 years there, did network forensics or cybersecurity space. Decided I wanted to do something new, so I went out, did prototyping AI systems in a software agency that I run on my own. And now I'm currently with a health tech startup, Care Hero, which helps doctors make more informed decisions on their patients' data using AI.
Isn't it mandatory in Singapore to join the military for a while?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, we have to serve 2 years. Usually that it's before our university. We'll spend 2 years before, we go to spend 4 years on our university.
I think they need to make it mandatory in the United States. It would probably solve a lot of our problems with our younger generations, I think.
Is there a manpower gap in the US? Or usually, I do see quite a lot of people joining the military.
There's no gap of manpower in the U.S., but there is I think Christian's alluding to the gap in a few other areas about the U.S.
Ah, okay, got it.
Discipline, hard work, ownership, name a few.
Yes, the military does train you up on that. Quite a bit. Makes you. I mean, the first 2 weeks we will. How they do it is the first 2 weeks you just stay in camp throughout. That's kind of like the first touch point for many young people, where they leave their families for 2 weeks. Before they return home once every week on the weekends.
Yeah, I was part of the military in the United States. Trevor wasn't part of the military, but his parents kind of threw him out in the jungle and made him take care of themselves, I think, right?
Yeah, I got to grow up in Central America out in Belize, and so it was a very fun, very interesting environment compared to the typical U.S. upbringing.
Oh, that's interesting. How long did you have to stay out for, or were you by yourself? Or?
Yeah, I remember I was probably 12 years old, and my dad got me this big pole spear, and he's like, okay, go out and go hunt fish and lobster. And I was just like, awesome, see you in 5 years, and then became obsessed with spear pitching from there. And so it was a fun time for sure.
Awesome. So let's get into AI a little bit, because I know one of your specialties, June, is AI. And before we hit record, we were talking about some of the challenges with AI and some of the emerging AI threats in healthcare. I think our audience would find some of those interesting. I think one of the things you brought up is that a lot of physicians or clinicians, almost 25%, are using AI in an unauthorized manner without any real controls around that. Maybe could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Regarding, as part of the article itself that mentioned that 23% of them were using unauthorized AI tools. Actually, through our own research as well, when spoke to clinicians and doctors, it is so convenient to just take up your phone while you are going around rounds in the hospitals, or even as a general practitioner in the clinic, right? To take out ChatGPT, just type in a few phrases to either diagnose the patient using text, or even you have an X-ray imagery, you just send it to ChatGPT and ask it, do you spot any anomalies in this thing? So these are increasing trends that we are spotting in interviews, actual interviews that we are doing.
So clinicians are actually using images, ultrasound or X-ray images, and uploading them to ChatGPT to help with a diagnosis now?
That is correct.
In a completely unauthorized manner.
Yes, that's what I shall not name names, but that's what we observe. Yeah, because I mean the capabilities of ChatGPT. I mean when it first came out to the state, I mean they came out almost 5 years now. It's probably coming 6 years now. And it's grown a lot, and its capabilities are amazing. I mean, you get real-time feedback, right, compared to you having to go down to a specialist just to get an outcome. And even patients are doing that themselves, uploading their own clinical data or their own medical history onto such platforms.
So what is the problem, just for our listeners, with clinician or doctor taking an X-ray ultrasound image, uploading it to ChatGPT and helping it give them a diagnosis? Are there any security issues with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one form of cyber attack, it's just manipulating a few pixels within the image itself, which might not be present to the human eye, right? And this could trigger a specific response by the AI to represent the data in a certain way, like for example, inserting or removing certain disease signs. And that could be a false positive in itself.
Even another big part of it, I think that if we're feeding this information into an AI, it's then feeding that back into its own training. And so that information becomes effectively part of OpenAI's domain when you're just feeding it someone else's health records, which is a major compliance violation.
Right, because if they're my medical records and I don't authorize them to be given to OpenAI or ChatGPT, then that's a problem, right? Because they may have personally identifiable information on there too.
That's correct. So, I mean, recently, I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they released ChatGPT Health. I think it's still slowly rolling out. It's supposed to deal with some of these issues, but we'll still need to wait and see how the trend pans out.
I know it's a trend is that data poisoning. Trevor and I have talked about data poisoning in a couple episodes. And something that I think is interesting, like a case you brought up earlier offline, was that 0.001% of corrupted data, training data, resulted in a 5% increase in wrong output. So that's a pretty broad skew from the amount of training data that resulted in a much larger percentage of wrong outputs. Is this becoming a bigger problem than we think? I know Trevor's answer on this, but I'll ask you, Jude, as well.
It really depends on the trend. I think the paper clearly draw that for those smaller models, when we are talking about 1.3 billion parameter models, those are more susceptible to these attacks. But the larger models, as we are scaling it up, might not be so. And also, if the larger data set itself is clean and fine tuned, I suppose I'm more positive on this note that such things will be cleaned up over time than more negative that it's going to cause more misinformation and harm, as AI tools. But of course, it's a double-edged sword in itself.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of angles with it that are important. So the first being, and we've talked about this before, we always say garbage in, garbage out. If you're training your AI on bad data, it's going to give you bad output every single time. And so I think you bring up a great point, which is how much context does this AI have? If it's on a lower subset, you're saying something like 1 billion parameters or even 10 billion parameters, but you're poisoning it with 100 or 1,000 bad bits of information. It doesn't seem like all that much compared to 1 billion, but that's still a significant enough amount of information to start manipulating output. If we're looking a little bit closer to 1 trillion data points that we're training it on, then you're going to see a little bit less of that. It has such a bigger context. It's going to understand how to filter out some of the bad points there. Now, having said that, I think that a lot of medical companies trying to spin up their own models are not necessarily going to have the research or maybe even the expertise to train these large models with large amounts of data points. It's a very expensive and a very time-consuming process. So I think that it is something to make sure that people have at the top of their minds while they're working through these problems. But I completely agree with your view that as the AI industry gets a little bit more mature, as these models get a little bit more complex, I think this is a problem that we'll see start to diminish.
Where do the people training the model get the data? That's always a question of mine, because it's not easy to get data from Europe. It may not be easy to get data from the United States or other countries. So aren't you going to introduce some bias anyway into the model because the data you're getting is not an accurate representation of humanity and diseases?
Well, right now they're paying $100 an hour in San Francisco to train AI models manually. And so just giving it a bunch of information in highly technical fields such as healthcare, they're hiring contractors specifically for that purpose.
How do they train it manually? What does that mean?
I honestly don't know about exactly how far the details go. I know the name of the company is escaping me, but they had a very strong valuation out here for training AI models through contractors who come in specialized industries to just provide a wealth of information to the AI. So it's getting it from recognized experts in especially difficult fields, really relevant in something.
KOLs?
From KOLs, the key opinion leaders in the space. We've been
Just learn what that acronym stood for.
Is that okay? Oh, okay.
As soon as I heard it,
You are killed.
I've heard it like 9,000 times since I figured it out last week. It was one of those viral ones, I guess. It can be difficult in medical law areas like that, where it's taking such a huge amount of information and then applying it based on connecting all of this context. And so a by the book representation of exactly what you learn during your residency or during med school is going to be different from how an actual hospital operates. And so seeing a little bit of that difference with these KOLs training the AI models themselves based on what's seen in the real world, I think does actually have a lot of value.
I was just in San Francisco last week at the JP Morgan event. And Trevor, you're right. Every billboard I saw was some AI company. We saw like some competitors to Waymo driving their AI vehicles around, test driving them. And it just seems like a bunch of hype, to be honest, over there.
I think to some extent, so they are seeing that a little bit of the mindset is that we're gearing up for a new era in technology, the same way that immediate viewed returns on the internet were not actually that huge from a business perspective compared to the way that it's scaled up over time. And so there's a lot of buzz in two directions. The first is that we are seeing a turn and a revolution in the way that technology fundamentally works. It takes time to get traction, but all these trillions of dollars being pumped into those companies is eventually going to show that output.
Who is putting this trillions of dollars in these companies? Are there really investors just like, if it's got AI on it, still going to just invest in the company?
Pretty much. I mean, a couple of them, swung it out of the park with OpenAI or Anthropic, and then now they're flush with cash to give to anyone.
That's like 2 out of 200,000 probably. The odds are probably not that great.
Well, when you're going for $1 trillion IPO, I'm sure you're making some pretty good money. But
Fair enough.
I think the other angle is that we are not seeing immediate return from AI. It is right now a little bit of a hype. And so from an actual business perspective, it does not provide the same amount of value that it costs right now. The other angle is that it is what it is. We tried, it didn't work out. AI is not going to be this huge groundbreaking thing. And while it definitely provided value, did it provide the trillions of value that it was expected to provide? No. So those are the two different angles that they're the predictions it could go. I guess time will only tell who is correct.
Well, what you're talking about in Silicon Valley, is San Francisco actually part of the Silicon Valley?
Technically, no. That's more south of here. That's
like Palo Alto.
Yeah, like everyone says, you're on the peninsula or you're in the city. And so down in the peninsula, that's the Silicon Valley.
Okay. That area and developing AI in the manner that they're developing them for like software as a service or something is very different than medical technology, because medical technology is very regulated. The time to market is a very long time to market. I think on average 7 years and $35 million is what it costs to bring a medical product to market. What's the contrast with AI for a commercial purpose that is not medical versus the guardrails that we're supposed to have on it for a medical device?
I think the investors for sure see it through a different lens. So healthcare investment, there's a strong investment space in healthcare, but investors seasoned in the industry understand you're not going to see your returns for quite a lot longer than if you were to give it to directly an AI company. So a lot of the larger investment companies and the VC firms out here, obviously AI is the hot things on everyone's mind, and they know they can possibly get an immediate, 1,000x return within a year of their investment because of how explosively these companies grow. Now, medical companies there's a proven path to do it. You build up a product, you scale it to a point where you get acquired by a strategic, or a private equity firm comes in and rolls up you and all of your competitors and then sells it off from there. These approaches are more consistent, they're more reliable, it's less of this moonshot, but it's a proven process to follow. And so investors who are experienced in the space, they're going to guide companies through that specific process instead of saying, you're doing something no one's ever seen before, here's some money to figure it out, hopefully you do.
And what about using AI to help write the code for your medical device or your application. Is that a safe way of doing it?
I'm going to say as a blanket statement, no, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts, June, on that.
I mean, right now the industry honestly is figuring itself out, but I think ever since coding agents that have come out, I mean the no-code and no-code tools like Lovable, V0 versus the fully coding agents like Claude Code and a few other IDEs that came out in the recent years, Cursor, Anti-Gravity, Windsurf. The code quality has been improving. But I mean, based on what I've been using agents almost like at least 4 to 5 hours daily. But if you stop monitoring it, if you let it go wild for let's say 15 minutes, the code itself, either you do not understand what it does. It has written like 200 or 300 lines of code to do what it is supposed to do in 5 lines.
So it's got some room for improvement. Because I also heard some stats from Veracode. Almost 50% of AI-generated code introduces vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting, which cross-site scripting has been around forever. It seems like the code should be smart enough to test cross-site scripting and things like that.
That is correct. But I mean, I would think that this could happen because it's training on the large volume of open source data as well, right? So if you think about it, a lot of public data could be coming from like hackathons or school projects where these programmers are fresh out of the market, right? So I mean, what you build it.
AI is training on code that was poorly written to begin with. So of course it's going to write poor code and vulnerable code. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I would think so. I mean, this is probably, I mean, the foundation of large amounts of code, right? I mean, large code bases that are very well cleaned in corporate setting. I think those would be governed as a IP in itself, and this would not be part of the training set itself. That's why it is a huge market today of AI tools trying to either rewrite code or vet the code and even give you a code review, like telling you what's wrong in the code. And then the human developer goes in to evaluate if that it's worthwhile for a fix. So there is a huge market right now. There are companies such as CodeRabbit, SonarQube that is doing this code quality checks using AI.
So we're looking at it through an admittedly very narrow lens with our focus. Our focus is what risk is introduced into the system, not how good is or how quality is your code. And so for us, you brought up a perfect example. Anytime I mess around with just building like a little custom project to see how some of these projects work, I created this little monitoring dashboard for some internal stuff and then mostly to test some of our workflows for source code testing, automation, and just to see how vulnerable it was. And I noticed that to create a small dashboard, small front end, really minimal back end, with just a couple of API calls to one third-party service, I was using Cursor, and it introduced almost 500 third-party components into the system when I just let it go nuts and do whatever it wanted. And so from a functional perspective, it does what I asked it to do. Is it massively and ridiculously bloated? Yes, it is. But I looked from there, what level of effort would be involved with getting it, manually patched up for security. And it wasn't that much. It was a weekend's worth of work. So I patched it all up for security. And then I look and I have this secure, but ridiculously massive, unclean, zero documentation code base. And so what we're looking at is making sure that the software is safe and secure. If we can prove that with 100 lines of code or 5 lines of code, it's not really too much of a concern from the security perspective outside of the fact that it can quickly become unmaintainable. The big concern is around that code quality. And that's something that's a little bit hard. And that's usually why, that's why advanced 15 years of experienced software engineers command such ridiculous salaries in these big tech hubs, is because they have the expertise to look and go, is this good? Not just, is that functional? So using an AI to do that, I think we're still a little bit in its infancy, but I think it'll get there eventually. But you bring up a great point. All these big corporations keep all their IP protected and private. So even their code review cycles are going to be private compared to scraping what some 17-year-old is doing off of the internet.
Yeah, it made me recall last week itself, there was the open source repo itself. It's a bit out of scope. It's a whiteboarding software, which is open source. They actually stopped accepting PR reviews that were AI written. So these are certain trends that are starting to happen in the open source community where there's a term for it now. They call it AI slop, that once it gets pushed in, you're actually spending more time to do the cleanup more than you just did it correctly the first time as a manual developer.
No, that's a good point. So software developers, some of them think the AI tool can help write the code faster, but you spend more time patching the holes, running down the software bill of materials, all the third-party libraries and everything else. And it sounds like it's notoriously inefficient. And Trevor, I think you told I don't remember the exact study. Not always, sometimes you used to talk about the study about proving that one line of code is secure. It takes like 4,000 pages of documentation or something, and it still isn't really proven.
That was one of our more senior testers here at Blue Goat. He did for his master's thesis proof that it was either 5 or 10 lines of code was secure, but really small, just a couple of functions. And he was proving there was absolutely, verifiably, mathematically zero risk introduced by the way that code was used. Like there was nothing you could do to hack it. And it was, 50 to 100 pages of proof for 5 or 10 lines of code that it is completely secure. Now, granted, completely secure is an extremely rare situation. I always say the only way you're going to get that is to go bury a box in the desert in Nevada with your device and never tell anyone where it is. And Christian always folks.
Nevada.
Exactly. Christian says even then it's not secure. So it's a really hard balance to hit. And I think that getting it to good enough is really all we can ever expect. Cybersecurity is always about getting it to good enough. Perfect is impossible in security. But if we can say with 5 lines, it's possible. With 500,000 lines of code, you're not going to prove that's perfectly secure. But how can you get away from any of the major risks that you would expect to see? How can you try to have multiple layers of protection against this so that you have a shielded approach that gives you effective security is the most important thing. I think that AI can help with that, but it does require a lot of layers around it to make sure that it's comprehensive.
And what are some of those layers? Maybe you could explain linting and syntax enforcement.
Yeah, so for linting itself, it is a tool to help you highlight where potential errors could appear in the code itself before it actually runs in production. So the code stays in the code editor itself, and it tells you this is a line that potentially is wrong, and then do you want to change it to the correct one? Whereas syntax and enforcement, the very fundamental of it, it's whether a developer chooses tabs or spaces, a single quote or a double quote. Because that itself also, when you have a 500,000 line code base, when you're searching for something, drilling down in the code base, you wouldn't want to be searching a piece of text with double colons or single colons. That requires 2 searches to get to that line of code. So linting and syntax enforcement and ensures that a team works on a code base that they are code understanding that both parties would understand and be clear. And when these people leave the organization or new people join the organization, they are able to take on the code base and move it forward.
What other things can be done, Trevor, to help make sure that code is being developed securely?
Well, there are a lot of regulated frameworks that are really important to look at. So in the medical space, IEC 62304 dictates the way that medical software needs to be developed in a safe fashion. And that looks at what level of risk are you introducing. So we've always say, perfect security is impossible. But what is good enough for, say, my phone compared to maybe the firmware running on my microphone, compared to an oxygen pump, compared to a pacemaker? There's a different level of risk tolerance within everything. And so looking at a standardized framework that says, here is something that is acceptable, here's something that's unacceptable, is very important. One thing that I do like to pull as my favorite easy win out of this guidance is understanding, and it seems really simple, but know what you're putting in your code. If you're bringing in a third-party library, did you look it up? Do you know if there are risks associated with it? Is it maintained? Who's maintaining it? Are they someone to be trusted with this process? And all too often, we'll start unpacking a product and looking into the code, and we see, well, there are 400 open source libraries that haven't been touched since 2007, and nobody even knows who wrote them anymore at this point. And they're rife with vulnerabilities, and there's no replacement because, again, hasn't been touched since 2007. It's a very common problem that we see, and so I think that's the easiest win that you can have just within the regulated space.
Is it pretty common for software developers to, let's say they run into a challenge, they need to create a function to Google it, and then copy paste what they found off the internet, including passwords and sensitive data in there?
Not super common, fortunately, but we do see it happen. And so one example was we had an engagement where we were working on a test that was authenticating to an API backend from a just from a web front end. We saw on that authentication attempt that we pulled out the bearer token and then we tried to crack it, and we were able to crack it. And the cracked output was huge. It was a massive 64-character string that they used as the secret, but it's because it had been publicly known, breached, and it was all this information was on Stack Overflow. And so when we see that put directly into the code base, the assumption is that someone says, hey, I need to figure out how to make this authentication work to the API. Oh, Stack Overflow, shoop, right into there. And it's something that we do see happen, unfortunately, more often than we would hope. But I do think it's getting a little bit better. And especially, this is a great use case for AI. Now that we have agents, things like Veracode, Sneak, whatever it might be, running through the code all the time, it's going to pick these things up really, really fast. And this was, before modern prevalence of AI coding tools. So we've had a little bit of maturity in the space even since then.
I think the hard-coded thing like that base 64 or the 64-character string you're talking about is probably like 10% of, if I had to pick a percentage of our clients and the code we look at, maybe it's close to 10%. What do you think?
I think for hard-coded credentials, probably even higher. It's super, super common to see in the code base, but very rare at that severity where you're able to break API encryption. That's a doozy. But what we usually see is any internal credentials or any internal secrets built specifically for the application. They'll get hard-coded in somewhere just to make authentication easy. And oftentimes it can even be a resource constraint problem, trying to get some build scripts set up where you're pushing out environment variables into the system and then calling to those environment variables. Or if you need to call to a cloud key store, is often going to be far more complicated than sticking the password directly in the source code. Having said that, it does introduce significant risk, and the FDA will push back heavily if they see that allowed in the system.
And June, I met you in Singapore. I think you were at the MedTech Innovator event. I think you actually attended my cybersecurity little lecture. And then you took us on a hike. You led us on the hike, right?
Yes.
It's like I thought it was like it's like this social MedTech event in Singapore. I thought it was gonna be like a mile or two hike. It ended up being I think it was like a 6-mile hike up and down every possible hill in Singapore in like 100% humidity.
In Sentosa, right? Yeah, it was a hot day that day. Yeah,
I think you found every hill in Singapore. And Trevor's been to Singapore quite a bit as well. And I think, what do you like better, Trevor? You always talk about Malaysia. You like Malaysia or Singapore better?
Well, I used to live in Malaysia, so I've got a little bit of a bias. But a big thing for me is food. I love it. I love food everywhere. And I think the food is a lot better in Malaysia. I love Singapore. It's really around.
Singapore says they're a foodie, though. But like literally everybody.
It's fighting words to say Malaysia or Singapore has better food. So I know that there's going to be a little bit of tension with that one. But
there are some tensions around that. And I think there can be the same food, and there are different variants of it when it's Malaysia and it's Singapore itself.
Yep.
But for Singaporeans, we love our long queues for some of the food.
I feel like Malaysia has a little bit more of, it's a bigger country. There's just, more people coming into it. So we get a little bit more of a mix, but I think that the infrastructure, just how nice and clean and tidy and easy everything is in Singapore. It's a very convenient place to be. Comparing the rail in Singapore and the subway to the MRT in Malaysia, it's a night and day experience getting around place to place. And so I think that Singapore is a little bit more of an easy and functionally good place to be. But granted, when we lived in Malaysia, we were flat broke and all we cared about was getting good Malay food. And so it was the perfect spot for us.
Gosh, eating Malay food, huh?
Yeah.
Which part of Malaysia were you in?
We were in KL, in Bukit Bintang.
KL. Bukit Bintang. It's a nice place.
So how is the medtech market? Because Blue Goat Cyber, we're investing in Singapore and Southeast Asia because we feel like it's a growing medtech market. We're part of MedTech Innovator in APAC over there. So what is your thoughts on the market, June? You think it's growing as much as we think it is? Like you've been there a lot longer than I have, and Trevor has, obviously.
I think definitely it's a growing market. Like some of my clients itself, especially, I think general practitioners in Singapore is a big market. So anytime you catch a flu and everything, we go to private clinics. So doctors own this clinics privately. It's not managed by the government. And they are actually going into the space where, because there's massive population going to see them, right? So some of these clinics nowadays are even running 24/7. They're going through a bidding war on the rent prices just to rent this clinic spaces. They're using AI to possibly even do a pre-triage. So the patient comes in, sends it their symptoms. By the time they reach the doctor, the AI would have already generated a snippet of the report. And the doctor can take it from there, quickly attend to the patient, and then before they exit. This could be very useful because there are large amounts of foreign or migrant workers coming to Singapore and work. And one of the criteria before you start work here is that you got to go through a health screening, a medical report, you got to see a doctor to kind of understand the report itself. And this process takes a lot of time. So AI itself could reduce the amount of time. Of course, there is also the other side of the risk.
So is AI in that use case, the risk with that? I feel like Trevor and I, we've had a couple AI people on, AI experts on our podcast. I remember what I'm talking about, the AI scribes that listen in a room, and the AI chooses to leave things. It chooses what matters. It chooses to leave certain things off the report that the doctor sees and then add other things that maybe shouldn't be on there. So is that still a problem? You feel like, June, with like this concept of trying to like decrease the time? I get that. But with AI, is it able to actually, I guess, incorporate the right information for the doctor?
I think two things that I see in my current view, which is the current state and the potential end state that it will be. I mean, given the current state, I think it, like what you've correctly mentioned, Christian, I think the AI scribes in itself, it doesn't work well in, let's say, the US market itself because there's the largest population. And I mean, a lot of AI models are the largest population or data set for the AI scribe could be based on English, right? Or mainly based on US or UK English. And if you extrapolate that and come into Southeast Asia where we have hundreds or even thousands of dialects in this region, how do you even fine-tune or train for that? That itself in an AI scribe would be a problem. Like we mentioned earlier, all the poisoning of data. And in the current state of things, I continue to see that there is this ongoing problem. But I think the potential of it is that if we do not start to evolve these workflows, we might be too late into the game when the technology actually arrives. So I think right now it's how do we put the guardrails in place to make sure that this, when the AI actually fails, it actually fails in a way that someone is able to catch it and correct it at the point of time. This in itself is a big problem because, I mean, there's also this term called automation bias where people try to agree more with what an AI generates more than a human telling the same thing. So I mean, that's my perspective of how things are in this market.
Yeah, we've experienced that before with a prospect where ChatGPT told the prospect how much our service should cost. And they're arguing with us that our price is wrong because ChatGPT said something different. We're like, how does ChatGPT know anything about our service or what we actually provide?
Yeah, ChatGPT says, this is how much Bluego charges. And he says, well, where did this number come from then? I go, I don't know. Where'd that number come from?
That's a good example. Yeah. Yeah, and it's going to be a harder and harder challenge, especially also from a pricing perspective when clients know that there are AI agents being able to write code and them trying out Lovable for the first time and they're saying that I can build a full-fledged code base in one day. So why are you charging tens of thousands of dollars just to get software done for me?
Yeah, you brought up a good point about AI being able to fail safely. That's something we always look at as well. Is like everyone always thinks about how great AI when it gets everything right, but rarely do people think about it when it gets things wrong. And that's usually where consequences happen and patient safety can be impacted as well. One other thing I want to touch upon here before we kind of wrap up, we're coming close on time, is I know Singapore is big on the labeling scheme, and Trevor and I talk a lot about labeling for cybersecurity because it's a requirement for the FDA, and it's a requirement pretty much internationally now. But Singapore's got quite a bit of rigor behind the labeling these days. Is that something fairly new in Singapore?
Yes, this is something new. I think they call it the Cybersecurity Labeling Scheme for medical devices. I think recently they also released a new one for Internet of Things as well. So what they're trying to, when I look it up and try to understand what is the objective or motivations behind it, right? I think the end state or the goal of cybersecurity remains the same. It is better to start early than start late when the product is already in the market. So the idea is that Cybersecurity Labeling Scheme, or in short, they call it CLS-MD, it's to give 4 levels of cybersecurity clearance to the product itself. So it kind of gives the awareness or the knowledge back to the consumer when they are buying that certain medtech device, where level 1 means they meet the bare cybersecurity requirements, whereas level 4, it has enhanced cybersecurity requirements, past independent third-party software checks as well.
Yeah, and I used to work in the U.S. Department of Defense, and you had to buy certain products that met a certain EAL level, like it's basically a design assurance level, and it was still very similar to this. So it's the same kind of concept where there has to be a certain degree of rigor for your device to be like level 4 in this situation where it's had a third party evaluate the source code and other things.
Yes. That sounds very, very similar. And yeah, I think this has been something that has been overlooked. Cybersecurity has been around. I mean, speaking in Singapore itself, I think it has been around for about 10, 15 years. And before that 10, 15 years, they've seen this increase because I think about roughly 10 years ago, there was a cyber attack on the national level where some of the health records were exfiltrated from the national healthcare system. So that was the point of time. And now with the uprising of AI itself and the coding quality, cybersecurity is seeing a renewed interest in this space, especially so for such sensitive devices like medtech devices.
Right. We always say with medtech devices, it's about patient safety. It's not just about stealing data. It's really, can I hack into a device and cause a misdiagnosis or harm a patient or even kill a patient? Awesome. Well, we're coming up here on time. So I like to go around the room and ask for last minute words of wisdom for our audience. So I'll start with you, Trevor, as usual. And you have to say something new instead of the same thing you always say.
Guide the AI, don't let the AI guide you. I feel like it's way too easy and it's way too prevalent for someone just to say, AI, make me a medical device. I'll check back in an hour. And then utilize whatever code it's spitting out. And you have no idea unless you understand that. AI coding tools are an incredible way to increase an engineer's output tenfold, if not 100-fold. But you need to be very careful guiding the AI through this process. Do it in a compartmentalized fashion. You should still build out your requirements to feed in the AI. Don't let the AI invent its own requirements. So it's in a careful fashion and don't let the AI just run out of control.
All right. June, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with that entirely with Trevor. And for my working model itself, I treat AI as my pair programmer. How I actually start things off with it is usually doing a trade-offs. I have this 3 software options help me evaluate or generate a matrix table for me of what they do or what they do not do and how it suits my needs. It is very good at abstraction as well, bringing it one level higher. So things like thinking about building integrations, building plugins. And lastly, for me, it's also helping me with my repetitive work. So this is the outcome that I know that I need to derive, but now I've got to do it 300 times in a similar fashion. But of course, there are some variations within that. And AI is good at that. And I can vet the output or vet the process of it doing the work correctly.
Awesome. Something I'll add is we kind of touched upon a little bit is using AI for like a clinical decision support system. I think we're okay with that, but we've gone through a lot of problems with AI, like hallucination, bottle poisoning, data poisoning, a lot of these things that can cause problems with AI. So I still think we need a human involved to interpret the results. But I feel like we're trying to push really quickly for AI to be a diagnostic tool and even a therapeutic tool without fully understanding a lot of these ramifications. Well, thanks for joining us, June from Singapore and Trevor from San Francisco. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona today. Sunny and warm and nice. Not quite as hot and humid as Singapore, but it is nice here today. And I hope everyone found value in this episode. So thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you so much, Christian and Trevor, for today's episode.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.